I want to share with you, I've had nothing but absolutely positive feedback and response to our breakfast meeting that you attended and spoke at last week in Southern York County. And I want to thank you for meeting with our York County farmers, for listening to them, for engaging with them, for asking or for answering those really difficult questions that they pose to you. I think that's probably one of the many reasons that the governor renewed your contract for yet another term, and I'm happy for that. So, Mr. Secretary, we all know the importance of farmland preservation, and there's a $2.5 million line being proposed by the governor for farmland preservation. Can you tell us what those dollars will be used for?
Yeah, Senator, thank you. And just to last Friday and the ag breakfast, I thought was really, really nice. I mean, the questions, were very thoughtful. I mean, the farmers are thinking hard about the current environment, economic environment, the trade issues, the war in Ukraine, chemical, usage. Very thoughtful. I just thought it was a really nice, focused, discussion about food and ag. And you represent an area that they're not shy to express their views about issues, which is helpful, right? Because it helps us sort of frame our responses and think about what the department's doing or needs to do. So thank you for that. The farmland preservation line item, an additional $2.5 million, is something that we advocated for several reasons. One is, as we have now grown our program, it leads the nation in farmland preservation, 6,000 plus farms. That is a lot of assets to keep track of and manage, right? We don't have the staff capacity to always focus to the extent we should. And we have heard repeatedly from counties saying the same thing, right? 25% of the farms have already changed hands in another generation. There are annual inspection requirements or biennial inspection requirements for every farm that's preserved. There have been a number of issues that have arisen about alternative enterprises on preserved land that may or may not be allowed for under the term of easement. And we've got folks who are incredibly creative and no fault, but I think they're just trying to make sure that we protect the asset that we said we were going to when we entered into the agreement. So part of the resources would be for PDA staff to support the counties and do our own due diligence, and the other portion of that will be, to the counties. I mean, I don't know the exact apportionment at this point, but significant part of the 2.5 goes to the county, and I think proportionally to where you have a greater number of easements by county should be in that first lineup for resources to help them do their job as well.
So it's a taxpayer investment. We have preserved, as you said, over 6,000 farms. I think the number's over 620,000 acres. And that represents a lot of taxpayer dollars. One of the challenges that I am seeing locally is that these preserved farms are bigger targets by entities that are seeking to build out energy infrastructure, whether through taking rights of way or condemnation. Several preserved farms in York and Franklin counties were targeted for a high voltage power transmission line to provide electric capacity to the Maryland suburbs because they can't generate enough power for their own residents. Now, a proposal in Chanceford Township along the Susquehanna River is threatening to take, I believe, over 30 family farms to build a hydroelectric power facility, which would mean taking 1,000 acres, flooding 600 acres to generate power for places like Maryland and Northern Virginia that aren't willing to do that themselves. Farmers like Jake Horton, whose family's been farming at their Chanceford Township property for more than 20 years, are going to lose it all because other states are not willing to generate their own power. So this is a significant taxpayer investment in these preserved farms. Now they're potentially going to be taken. How do we take the targets off of our farmers' properties and instead support them and the significant investment that taxpayers have made in preserving that farmland?
Yes, and it's a great question. All right, so there's about three pieces to that. One is, on the preserved farms, and I think there are several in this proposed project that are preserved farms. So one of our issues and the additional overlay here is that these are FERC projects. They're federal projects and regulated as such, which gives us limited role for the Pennsylvania Utility Commission and limited role for the Agricultural Lands Condemnation Approval Board. Right, so we several years ago had the transmission lines through York County, which was part of this conversation. I think you had a lot of folks who were at the breakfast last week who also expressed to us in that setting their disappointment with us because we could not intervene, right, to protect those prime agricultural lands. So you have multiple issues there. Having some way for the state to have a role in the federal, the FERC-type projects, I think is number one, right? Two is you can always strengthen the Agricultural Lands Condemnation Approval Board. I think that's a piece that we should talk about. You have eminent domain issues inside of this concern. But we ought to do everything possible and put the preserved farms at the very, very, very top of the list of protection, right? It is a covenant that in that deed it says you shall keep this farm as a productive agricultural asset in perpetuity. It doesn't say if you'd like to, if the next owner does, if your family feels like it. It says you shall, right? So we ought to really protect that at all costs to keep folks away from it because we did it for the purpose of protecting the prime agricultural land and the production capacity of those soils in that farm. So we should talk further about that, right? Because I think there's things underneath that issue you raise. And it's worth noting that for all of the voices that come back to us in the Chesapeake Bay conversation, it is worth noting that 25% of our electric generation goes into an area that helps them sort of be who they are, right? That doesn't come back in terms of credit to us, in terms of our Bay calculation. So an important teaching point that it's not always about nitrogen and phosphorus. There could be the molecules of electrons.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, Mr. Secretary, and I appreciate that insight, and we'll look to continue to work on this issue with you. And we're very proud of the fact that our yields per acre significantly exceed most other places in this Commonwealth, and that's really very important and worth noting. So I thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Up next,